The sky god Tengri watched as blood stained an entire bloodline faced extinction beneath the... This was not an ending, but a pruning to forge a stronger nation. Long before history recorded the rise of the great Khans, the Turkic people were aflame, nearly extinguished by a hurricane of betrayal. In the shadow of the frozen peaks, a civilization lay in ruins, and its fires had gone cold. The massacre was total and merciless. The rival tribes had struck in the dead of night, their horses screaming like desert swords of iron. The very metal the Turks had taught the world to master were turned against their own creators with a hollow, biting cruelty. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the steppes were silent, save for the rhythmic crunch of boots on the permafrost as the victors picked through the wreckage of broken yurts. Kiyan, a prince of the noble line, and Neguz, his nephew, watched from the jagged heights of a hidden ridge, their eyes reflecting the ruin of their entire world. Beside them stood their wives, shivering and silent, the four of them the only survivors of a genocide intended to wipe their name from the earth forever. They were the narrow bottleneck of a future empire, four souls carrying the legacy of the high steppe. As the enemy hunters scoured the foothills to finish their bloody work, a low, haunting... It was not a sound of hunger, but a divine summons. Through the swirling snow, a shimmering gray wolf appeared. The Bozkurt, an avatar sent by the eternal blue sky. She did not attack. She beckoned. The survivors followed her into the impossible heights of the Altai, pushing through passes so narrow the wind itself could barely breathe. Behind them, the path vanished into the mist. Before them, guided by the wolf's golden eyes, they found a hidden gateway into a valley of eternal green. Ergenekon. It was a mountain fortress provided by the gods, a lush sanctuary where the world could no longer find them, and where the long, slow forge of their rebirth would begin in the quietest of shadows. Kiyan and Neguz stepped into a world protected by the stone fingers of the Altai, a secret sanctuary where the air tasted of wild time, and they named it Ergenekon, the steep slope where one finds rest. In this emerald valley, the four survivors planted the seeds of a future they would never live to see. The seasons turned with a rhythmic grace, and the small cluster of yurts soon blossomed into a sprawling sea of felt and timber. For 400 years, the descendants of the survivors thrived under the watchful gaze of the eternal blue sky. They were a people born of the mountain, sturdy of limb, with bronzed skin and eyes that captured the intensity of the Central Asian sun. The sons of Kiyan became master herdsmen, filling the meadows with horses of legendary speed, while the lineage of Neguz grew into formidable warriors and craftsmen who could make the very earth obey their hands. They did not simply survive, they conquered the landscape of their exile. They forged tools from the valley's rich veins and wove life from the thick wool of their ever-expanding flocks. This was a golden age of isolation, a fertile womb that nurtured the Turkic spirit while the world outside forgot they ever existed. Yet, the wheel of time is a relentless master. What was once a vast open playground for a budding tribe eventually became a crowded labyrinth. The high mountain walls, which had served as the ultimate shield against the genocidal blades of their ancient enemies, began to feel like the cold bars of a prison. Every acre of the valley was claimed. Every blade of grass was grazed. The laughter of 3,000 families now echoed against the unforgiving stone, a constant reminder that their numbers had far outgrown the sanctuary's heartbeat. The elders would sit by the fires and tell stories of the distant, infinite steppes, of a world without borders where a horse could run until the sun dipped below the horizon. But to the young, these tales felt more like myths than memories. They looked at the impenetrable, sky-piercing peaks surrounding them and felt a growing, desperate hunger for the wind. The paradise had finished its work. The cradle was now far too small for the giant it had raised. The seasons turned with a heavy weight as the valley of Ergenekon, once a boundless paradise, began to tighten around the throats of its people. The descendants of the 4 survivors had multiplied like the stars in the vast Central Asian sky, and the once ample fertile grasses were now trampled by 1,000 restless herds. The elders looked upon the towering, jagged peaks of the Altai and felt the cold dread of a people who had outgrown their cradle. They searched every crevice, every dark throat of the canyons. But the way back, the secret path Kiyan and Neguz had traversed centuries ago, was swallowed by the shifting earth, and it was then that an old blacksmith, a man whose skin was the color of scorched earth and whose eyes held the glint of a cooling ember, stepped forward from his forge. He was a master of the Ashina clan, the lineage of those who knew the secrets. He did not look at the sky for a path. He looked at the bones of the earth itself. On the northern flank of the valley stood a mountain that had baffled the sun's warmth for generations, a massive wall of dark, unyielding stone that the people had long believed was the solid edge of the world. Everything they believed up to this point was wrong. The smith approached this mountain, not with a traveler's hope, but with a master craftsman's precision. He struck the base of the peak with his heavy iron mallet, and instead of the dull thud of limestone or the brittle snap of granite, the entire valley shivered with a metallic ring that echoed like a war cry through the high mountain air. "This is not stone," he declared to the gathered elders, his voice rasping and heavy with the wisdom of the forge. "This mountain is a heart of pure iron ore. It is the very material that binds our horses' hooves and sharpens our blades, yet here it stands as our jailer." The people looked at the impassable barrier with despair, for how could mere flesh— "Is it not enough that we have survived here?" one elder asked, his voice shaking like a dry leaf in the wind. "Must we now challenge the earth itself?" "Survival is for the sheep," the smith replied, his high-boned, sun-etched features hardening in the twilight. "A wolf does not merely survive. A wolf conquers. And I will show you how to conquer a mountain." The smith's eyes glowed with the light of the eternal blue sky, the Koktengri. He understood that the element that guarded their prison was also the key to their liberation. "We cannot climb it, and we cannot dig through it," the smith whispered to the crowd, his hands "We must make the mountain weep. We must treat this entire peak as if it were a single blade in the hearth of the gods." He called upon the men to gather the wood of 1,000 forests and the charcoal of 10,000 fires. He instructed them to fashion 70 bellows from the hides of the mountain oxen, each one massive enough to breathe the wind of a hurricane. The plan was madness: to turn the geography of the Altai into a furnace. "Do you hear it?" the smith asked, tilting his head toward the whistling wind. Tengri does not speak in words. He speaks in the roar of the fire and the ring of the metal. He is telling us to wake up. Under his direction, the descendants of the survivors ceased their mourning and began to gather the fuel for their salvation. Preparing to test the strength of their blood, he knew that the fire they were about to ignite would either grant them the world or consume their last remnants in an inferno of failed ambition. The great forge was not merely a construction of wood and coal, it was the collective heartbeat of a nation etched into the very soil of the Altai. Under the watchful eye of the master smith, the descendants of Kiyan and Neguz labored with a ferocity born of 4 centuries of longing. They gathered wood until the forests of Ergenekon were thinned, stacking layer upon layer of charcoal against the towering shoulder of the mountain that experts knew to be rich with iron ore. Then came the bellows, 70 of them, fashioned from the thick scorched hides of the great steppes oxen. Each one was manned by a lineage of survivors, men whose hands were calloused by generations of labor, but whose spirits remained as unyielding as the metal they sought to master. When the smith gave the command, the silence of the valley was shattered. The 70 bellows roared in a rhythmic, mechanical choir, forcing life-giving air into the belly of the furnace. The heat was not merely physical. It was a divine manifestation of the Turkic soul. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, the very stones began to groan and weep, turning from solid rock into a river of molten fire. Crimson streams of liquid iron snaked through the charcoal, carving a path through the impassable barrier. It was then that a shadow emerged from the swirling smoke and steam. The gray wolf, her eyes gleaming like twin stars under the gaze of Tengri. She did not speak, but her presence was a command from the Sky Father himself. She turned her muzzle toward the narrowing gap where the cooling iron had formed a passage just wide enough for a loaded camel to pass. Following her lead, the people of Ergenekon stepped through the cooling metal into the biting wind of the outer world, reclaiming their destiny on the first day of spring as the earth itself was reborn. The heat of 70 bellows finally faded, leaving a path of cooling, blackened glass where a mountain of iron had once stood. Through the shimmering haze of the cooling rock, a single figure emerged from the shadows of the ancient forest to stand at the mouth of the gap. It was the gray wolf, her fur the color of storm clouds over the Altai, her golden eyes reflecting the dawn of a new era for her children. She did not howl. She simply turned and began to trot toward the vast open horizon of the Central Asian steppes. Following her lead, the descendants of Kiyan and Neguz stepped out of their 400-year isolation. They were men and women with high cheekbones and eyes the color of the earth, their skin bronzed by the valley sun and their hands hardened by the labor of the forge. They were no longer a small tribe of refugees hiding in a golden cage. They were a nation forged in the very fires that had liberated them. As they spilled onto the ancestral plains, they did not just reclaim their land. They reclaimed their destiny as the masters of the world's metal. The world they found was wide and waiting for the rhythmic clang of their hammers. This exodus, occurring on the first morning of spring, marked more than a seasonal change. It was the birth of the Göktürk Khaganate, led by the noble lineage of the Ashina clan. It was the rise of Buman Kagan, who would eventually transform this small band of survivors into an empire that stretched from the Great Wall to the Caspian Sea. But even as they built their greatness and rode their swift horses across every horizon, they never forgot the smell of the charcoal or the roar of the fire that saved them. They understood that their survival was a divine signature from Tengri, the eternal sky, who sent the wolf as a messenger and gave the anonymous smith the wisdom to break the bones of the earth. This is why, even today, when the spring equinox arrives and the festival of Nevruz begins, the elders and leaders of the Turkic people gather around a sacred forge. They heat a piece of iron until it glows with the ghost of the mountain's fire, and they strike it with a heavy hammer upon an anvil. That sound, the sharp ringing pulse of metal on metal, is the heartbeat of a people who refuse to be contained by any barrier, no matter how ancient or massive. It reminds us that no matter how high the walls around us may seem, or how narrow our valleys become, there is always a way through if we have the courage to apply the heat of our collective will. The iron is not merely a tool for war or agriculture. It is a symbol of the human spirit's ability to reshape its own reality. We are all, in some way, descendants of those who once stood before an impossible mountain and chose to melt it. The ancient stories still speak to us. Subscribe to hear. Tell us in the comments.